Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast, which is dedicated to nonprofit leaders who are passionate about making a difference. I'm your host, Haley Cooper, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on a journey of growth, inspiration, and transformation. At Lead with Heart, we believe that leading with heart means embracing empathy, compassion, and authenticity in every aspect of our work. It's about putting people first, fostering genuine connections, and creating a positive impact that goes beyond numbers and metrics. In the nonprofit world, it can often feel like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. The challenges are immense and the road can be lonely. But here, you're not alone. This podcast is a community where we support each other, share our stories, and learn together. Each episode will dive into personal and professional development topics tailored specifically for nonprofit leaders. From innovative fundraising strategies and effective team management to self-care practices and leadership insights, we're here to provide you with practical strategies that you can apply to your life and work. My goal is to empower you, elevate your leadership, and engage your heart in all that you do. I want to help you navigate the unique challenges of the nonprofit sector with confidence and resilience, so you can continue to create meaningful change in the world. So whether you're driving to a meeting, taking a break, or winding down for the day, tune in and join us on this journey. Together we'll discover what it truly means to lead with heart. Thank you for being here. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. And I am so excited to have Christian here today with me. And we are going to chat about a lot of things and all my favorite things about leadership. He is the author of Train to Lead, The Unstoppable Leader's Plan for Peak Performance. It's a book that provides leaders with a structured pathway to achieving success while maintaining balance in their personal and professional lives. Christian's expertise is not just theoretical. He has empowered business owners and executives to boost revenues by over $500 million, while also helping them reclaim valuable time for their families. His leadership and business strategy insights are further enriched by his international disaster relief and community development work across 40 countries. Christian's combination of practical experience, academic rigor, and specialized training offers a unique perspective on ethical leadership, employee care, and the importance of community service. Well, I'm excited to dive into just your journey, but also the book, because like I told you offline, it was very digestible as a former athlete. And so we're just going to dive right into the leaderships. But first, welcome to the podcast, Christian.
Thank you, Haley. It's good to be here.
Well, Christian, your work spans across both corporate world, nonprofits, ministry, international disaster relief. How have your experiences in the global community development shaped your views on leadership and business strategy?
Well, I would say my experiences internationally were drivers to what I do now. Because when I was working in disaster relief work, and other contexts, I just began to see that you could be in a very well-funded project in a relatively safe or secure part of the world. And if your team wasn't led well, or the team didn't get along well, or the partners you were working with locally weren't led well, it was very hard to make things work. You were constantly fighting against your own internal headwinds, so to speak. But you could be in the context of a war zone or fresh disaster zone where there's a lot of chaos, in an underfunded project where you don't have the resources or the people that you need. But if there was good leadership and people got along well, It was amazing what you could accomplish. And so I became fascinated by those dynamics. And because I thought the work that we were doing was really important, I thought it was important that we did learn how to lead well. And unfortunately, oftentimes, and I think you've probably seen this, many of the people that end up leading in those contexts get stuck. I don't know, for lack of better terminology, a warm last man standing, last woman standing process to hiring. Oh, you're here, you're in charge. And so it isn't necessarily that people don't want to lead well, but they just don't understand what's involved or they're not personally prepared for it. And so I became very passionate about leadership and team dynamics. And that launched me off on a trajectory of both personal study, academic study, and eventually brought me to where I'm at now.
Yeah, I love that. And like I was telling you off screen, at age 24, I was put into a leadership position in a foreign country with no leadership experience and just told to figure it out. And at the time, there was like limited social media and there was no internet where I was living. So it's not like I could do a lot of research on leadership. It was just trial by fire. And I failed a lot, but I also learned, being in a different culture, how to navigate different dynamics and be able to lead in a different setting. That was 12 years ago, and that's influenced, kind of similar to you, how I'm able to lead today.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And unfortunately, far too many people are placed in situations of potentially having a lot of influence, and they end up spending a lot of their time just trying to figure out how to fulfill the role and to fulfill the responsibilities. And that's not entirely wrong, but I think if we can shortcut that in some way and get people up to a place of at least reasonable competency or even like fantastic competency quicker, then you have less damaging mistakes. Because I was reading your bio and you're talking about burnout in the nonprofit world. And a lot of that comes from people that are being placed in positions where they're not really sure how to do the job. And so much energy is just consumed with trying to survive. And if you're working in a context where your decisions really have big impact on people's lives, then that's very consuming. Yeah. And I think if there's ways to help better equip people, I mean, that's how I got involved in leadership and consulting is, wow, what if we just help the leaders that are there be more effective as opposed to starting another nonprofit to save the children or to help with this environmental issue or that economic issue. We just help the existing ones be effective. And that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think that's where the ripple effect of change happens when we're investing in our leaders today and obviously future leaders as well. So you wrote your book, Train to Lead. Like I said, I was reading it last night before we hit record on this podcast. And I just was able to just dive right in. The chapters are relatively short, but I just love that it was related to athletic performance because, like I said, I'm a former athlete. So I was able to just really relate to the concepts, and some of them are new. And so you emphasize a structured approach to leadership. Could you explain what this means and what inspired you to create this framework?
Yeah. So there's a couple of points to this. One is I saw how most leadership development, both in the nonprofit and in the corporate world, is mostly either what you experience, where you're just thrown into it, sink or swim, figure it out, or we'll send you a bunch of classes and training, and it's a fire hose of concepts. There's just all this ideas, strategies, and tactics and approaches you could use, and leaders don't know where to start. They don't know which one applies to them. They don't know how to use them. And the other big thing is you don't know which of these approaches are really dependent on other strengths that needed to be cultivated first. And so you try to use an approach, and then it turns out some of your personal development hasn't been there, or some other skill isn't in place. And so the approach doesn't work, and you don't know why. And so part of my background is also in athletics. And I also was a fitness instructor for about 12 years. And so I was just thinking about it one day. I was driving home from the gym and I was thinking, well, why is it that you could take an athlete, and if you put together a structured plan, you can take an athlete and your entire team and have them peak out, be absolutely ready to go at their highest level the day before their event. But with leaders, it's always just a kind of the roll of the dice. Like, here you go. Don't screw up. And I thought this is not right for leadership, which is such a big deal topic and has such impact. What if I applied some of the core underlying training strategies that you use to prepare athletes, that a trainer would use or an instructor would use to prepare athletes? What if I were to, as a thought experiment, what if I applied those to leadership concepts? And so that originally was just an idea that I started playing with. And then I realized there was an enormous amount of crossover in those concepts in terms of structured approach, first building yourself as a leader, and then beginning to layer on self-management skills and leadership strength skills as you progress through a framework of leadership skills that every leader will need at some point, helping people understand which of these are dependent on other things first and how to approach it, because you can't learn it all at once. And so I thought a structured framework would be more accessible to people. If somebody's about to get promoted or step into a new role, or they recently have, they can get up to speed. I say that people can significantly improve their leadership capacity within 90 days if they follow the processes in the book. It's not going to make you the best leader on the planet. In the same way, you can't go to the gym and in 90 days become an Olympic athlete. You know that if you have a good training plan, where you can be in 90 days is dramatically different than if you just show up at the gym and try to do stuff for 90 days. It's all good, but one of them is more likely to produce results.
Yeah, and it might not be as efficient. Like, you might just be doing things like lifting weights to lift weights, right? But if you don't have a structured program, it's not going to really get you the results that you want. And as a former athlete, as a graduate with a BA in kinesiology, like, I know the structures of what it takes to have peak performance, like nutrition, your training program, water intake, rest, sleep. All of those things are important for athletes. So how did those kind of translate into leadership? What are some of the core pillars that you explain in your book that are a part of this framework?
Yeah, so some of the, like what you were just talking about, and you know this, you've probably heard the phrase that you can't outrun a donut, or six-pack abs are made in the kitchen. And so it's this concept that a lot of people want to know what exercise they can do to look a certain way. And most of the answer to that is really how you eat and sleep and drink, and just taking care of your body in that basic regard. And so the application of basic nutrition and habits, I apply to leadership in the sense of what are the inputs that you take into your life in terms of your relationships that you have, in terms of media content that you bring in, and learning to curate what comes in and understanding that as a form of nutrition, so to speak. And so making sure that you're bringing in the right kinds of influences. And in the book, I explain a lot of the science behind this, because these are well-researched topics. And so making sure that the influences you bring in build your perspective and your worldviews so that you're able to be the kind of leader who has the confidence, first of all, and then second, is able to relate to people in complicated situations and produce positive change. Then on the other hand, looking at what influences are in your life and identifying ones that maybe have a toxic effect or a negative effect, and starting to remove or limit those. So that's the foundation. And then we move on to conditioning, which in athletics was really preparing your body for stress to be able to take on new demands. And the leadership parallel that I draw is self-management. That if you can manage yourself well in terms of your time and your energy and your priorities, you can manage your ability to follow through, you know how to complete things, leadership specific topics, but they apply broadly, then you're able to step into leadership roles. But a lot of my leadership coaching is going back with executives, back to helping them get some of the basic self-management. Then layering on that concepts of core leadership strengths, like the ability to inspire vision or to challenge processes or to encourage people. But basically, there's 5 research-based strengths that if leaders build them, then that gives you a foundation for anything else you want to do. And if you don't build strength as a foundation, then it's very hard as an athlete to progress. layering on that's power, which is the ability to exercise strengths forcefully or quickly, particularly in crisis, in change, or in conflict, where you need to change the course of a situation. So I talk about how to use those strengths in those contexts. And then endurance and being able to go for the long haul. How do you do that both in terms of when you're working with projects that are long or when you've been leading an organization for a long time? How do you prevent burnout and how do you stay personally engaged? And then also you talked about rest and recovery. Every athlete that I know hates doing that. They always want to keep playing the game. They have a hard time stopping. And I think most hard driving leaders are very similar. They have a hard time dialing back. They have a hard time believing that less might be more. And so discussing about how to do that so that they can stay in the game in a healthy way for a long time. And that's basically the process. And what I try to illustrate in the book is that you shouldn't try to become the best or learn everything about any one of these before you move on. Really, you just want to learn enough to gain some growth in that area and then move on to another topic set. And then you just cycle through those. And that's how you train athletes, is you don't try to get somebody to be the strongest person in the world. You just try to get them strong. And then you move on to power, and then you move on to endurance. And it's the same kind of idea for leaders. That's an overview, if that helps.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm one of the weird ones who likes to read the last book of a page before I actually read the book. And I was reading towards the end of your book, this concept of how managing in the most important thing, and I'm paraphrasing, so obviously you can make it better, but around the self-management, like managing is how we lead well for others. And I read this book called Lead Well from Within, and it's all about this idea of self-management and how we have to start with ourselves first. So can you explain a little bit more about what self-management looks like and some of the tools that you use to help leaders reflect on what's going on inside of them?
Yeah. So I just came from meeting with a client. It was a turnaround situation where a company had been really failing and I'd helped them turn around over the last 4 years. And they've now doubled in size from 20 to 40 million. They're doing real well. We were able to keep the entire management team, which is really rare in those scenarios. And they're doing fantastic. But as they're looking at now growing and adding another 10 or 20 million in revenue, they're running into questions related to accountability and how do we make sure everybody does what they say they will do? And that comes down to self-management for leaders. And will leaders themselves be consistent? Because at a certain point, you either do show up and do the work or you don't. And that commitment really has to be something you choose. And so that's the importance of self-management is ultimately you lead out of who you are. And so you have to really do that work. One of the most common topics in self-management that almost every leader wrestles with has to do with time, priority, and energy management. Knowing how do I get it all done? Or if I only had more hours in the day or any of those things. And so in that, most people come to me saying something like, I need help with time management, which isn't really the right place to start because everybody has the same amount of time. It's just some people feel like they don't. And what's interesting is that leaders of companies that are smaller often struggle more with time management, even though they're actually dealing or managing fewer things. But it feels overwhelming. Like legitimately, they're maxed out. They're putting in 16-hour days. They're trying not to work 7 days a week, but they're just frazzled. And what I like to try to do is help people recognize that you have high quality times to work. And there's a lot of science around this in terms of your body and your brain and so on. But there's times when you can be very productive. And you've probably discovered that in your own life, that there's times where if you can be alone and just focus, you can get a whole lot done in that period of time. Whereas if you try to get it done other times, it just takes forever to get things done. And if you can discover when those times are, and most people, in terms of your body's rhythms, have one or two of those times where they can be very productive during a workday. And if you know when those are and you protect those, that's your energy, knowing how to capture when you're at optimal energy. And then with that, make sure you're only doing your priority work during those times. So you're not letting yourself get interrupted by phone calls, people walking past your door, emails dinging on your computer. You've shut all that stuff off and you're working on your priorities. In my experience personally, but then also with my clients, people who are typically doing 50, 60-hour work weeks can find themselves getting down to whatever their preferred time frame is for work, getting home on time to spend time with family, being able to be fully engaged with family, being able to take vacations and not have to be answering the emails while they're on vacations, all of those kinds of things, while dramatically growing their organizations, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit. And so you can do more with less in terms of time and effort if you know how to put the right time and the right effort in the right place so that you're gaining traction with, and it's not just being spent all over the place.
Yes, I love that so much. And are there any, I've heard of like the Pomodoro method. I've read Cal Newport's Deep Work, and I think he also has another book. I've read Essentialism. Like, are there specific strategies for when they have those like 2 to 3 hours? And maybe for me, it's the afternoon. I'm a slow build in the morning, but in the afternoon, I'm like 1 to 4, head down, I can do work. And so are there specific strategies that you encourage people to really maximize the time that they have during that energy flow?
Yeah, and everything you mentioned is good. Cal Newport, I just read his most recent book, which is called Slow Productivity. And it's a fantastic book. And a lot of what I advise my clients is similar to that, but he had some additional ideas and research in that. The simplest version, like for a takeaway for maybe this conversation for some people, is identify that time. So if you know, like between 1 to 4, it's your time frame, that's your magic time where you can just make things happen. Then what I would do is religiously protect that time. I would ensure, or at least protect about an hour and a half of that time and make sure that there are no other interruptions and that you don't wander into that time, that you know, okay, for me to accomplish what I want to accomplish over the next quarter, over the next month, this week, here's what I need to be doing during that time. So you just published a book. It's released right now. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So now you're on the book launch process. And so maybe part of what you want to do is focus on your book launch. And so you're going to say, and it's not just broadly, like specifically, what do I need to do today between the hours of 1 and 2:30 to make my book launch happen? And then when you walk into that time, you already know what you're going to do. You have that time dedicated to it. And if you do that consistently and time is blocked for it, then you'll find that you'll make enormous progress in that. Whereas people who say, I'll try to work on that when I have time this week, will almost never actually be able to get to it.
Yes.
This is especially true for things that are really going to make a difference in your personal life, or in your leadership, or in your organization that you lead, but they're not the things that are fun or easy to do. Those things take so much extra willpower that if you wait until you're ready, you never are. If you wait until you've got energy, you don't, because they consume your energy. So if you set aside time, your best time for that, you can start to make progress in leaps and strides.
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location, so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs, helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. Yes, that is so good. And if someone is listening to this today, I think sometimes we need permission to block it off and someone to tell us to do it. So if you're listening to it, like literally click on your calendar, find that time and block it off while you're listening to this, if that's a takeaway for you. I also want to talk about the power concept, because a lot of the work that I do is around conflict management and conflict resolution. And it was funny because I was talking to my child's teacher yesterday about regulating emotions and like understanding, and he's 5. So like he's little, right? But I made a joke that like I literally help adults understand the language of emotions And it's good that they're instilling it at such a young age, but there are adults that struggle. Just any relationship, right? We're going to have a level of emotional disconnection in certain moments, especially heightened ones when we're dealing with a lot of change and we feel alone or we don't feel seen or we don't feel heard. So I would love to know, kind of dive deeper into how, obviously I have my own framework that I learned through Lola Gershfeld, who's been on the podcast, called EMC Leadership. And that's the framework that I use to help people understand the language of emotions and navigate conflict. But I would love to know your framework around that and how you help leaders in those heightened moments maintain that self-management, but also be able to regulate themselves and stay regulated in that situation.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. My first book is actually called Conflict and Leadership. And so I do a deep dive on this topic. So it's pretty extensive. I want to answer that question by starting in a different place. And so if you feel like this isn't like the answer you want, let me know and I'll adjust.
Go for it.
I look at 4 different areas that leaders should explore when there's conflict. One is the self-management that you're talking about. So personally, how am I reacting to this conflict? How am I responding? Maybe how have I contributed to what's going on? And so there's an opportunity. I view conflict through the lens of opportunity. This is something I learned from someone named Ken Sande, who's an author and it taught a lot on conflict resolution. But I view it through the lens of opportunity because whenever there's a conflict, it almost always is going to be around something that's important to both sides. And if we can understand what that important thing is, and we can value that it's important to other people, it makes it easier for us to begin to find the handles on the conflict so that we can address it. But the first place I encourage people to look at is the self side of it, like you're referring to, both emotional management and so on. The second one is the relational dynamic and understanding the history and the patterns of relating that are going on there. And that's where almost all conflict resolution books and training focuses, is on the self-management and on the relational dynamics. What I hoped to do in my book, and this is another thought that'll probably be helpful for one of your listeners, or possibly two, but everybody deals with conflicts. There's probably a bunch, is the majority, like the biggest bang for your buck, if you're a leader and you're dealing with conflicts in your organization, is to not primarily focus on the individuals. That's symptomatic almost always. The conflicts that come up in teams or in organizations will be manifested in the way people don't get along with each other, or they stop talking to each other or argue or whatever the thing is. But behind that, you have systems and you have culture. And leaders can transform both of those. And in fact, leaders are the only ones that really can. And what I have found, because part of my background is as a mediator and a conflict coach and all of those things. And so when I first learned how to do this, I would do the brute force mediating team disputes, spending months and months working with people and interviewing people and coaching people. And we'd come to a resolution. And it was always a heavy lift. It would work, but it was really hard. Then I started realizing by looking at the patterns that were happening in these disputes, a high amount of these disputes are really about, there were always unclear expectations communicated from leaders, very ambiguous roles and responsibilities, and job descriptions weren't defined, or any of those things weren't clear. And just by clearing something like that up, you eliminate all kinds of downstream conflict. It just goes away. And so you don't have to self-regulate. You don't have to deal with the interpersonal disputes because they're just not happening. And then culturally, it's the same thing. 2 common traits that happen oftentimes in nonprofits is that you'll have leaders that are conflict avoidant because they want to be nice to people and they want people to like them. And you have leaders that sometimes struggle with accountability. They personally don't want to be accountable. And they also have a hard time holding people appropriately accountable. And so between the two, you're going to have all kinds of conflict in the organization because there's this looseness that's happening in terms of people don't talk about real issues because they avoid conflict and they avoid accountability. And if you can change that cultural trait where you have healthy, respectful accountability and people know how to productively step into conflict or disagreements, all of a sudden you begin to resolve all kinds of issues and you can begin to gain all kinds of traction in your organization. An example of what I'm talking about is back in 2000, was working with the disaster relief organization in Kosovo. And I was originally hired to help out with what they call a psychosocial program, working with kids that have been impacted by it. We use the term PTSD. This was before that was a common term, but we were working with children that were dealing with PTSD. So I started a couple of schools over there that had therapeutic programs in them to help work with the kids. And we had in one community, we had two classes. Kids were the same age, same everything about them. They were just randomly in one class or the other, just due to numbers management. But what we found is that in one class, the kids were fighting constantly. In the other class, they weren't. It was fine. And so the teachers asked me to come in, and I observed the classes to try to understand what was going on. And what we found was with one class, whenever the toys were brought out for recess or playtime, one of the kids in particular couldn't handle the toys, the stimulation. They came from a very poor community. Almost nobody had toys, actually. And so it's just overstimulation. We weren't aware of that. We didn't think about that when we were designing the classes. And he would get triggered and pop, and then other kids would spike, and then everybody be fighting and crying pretty soon. So we just decided, do we deal with the interpersonal issue? Do we start disciplining the kids or trying to coach them how to handle this or work with that? And we debated it for a while. Then we realized, actually, this is probably our fault. Not like we were being bad, but we had introduced a stimulus that these kids were not used to, which was toys. And instead of making this a question about punishment, there's a place for discipline, but instead of making this about it and distracting the energy of the kids in the class from what we were trying to teach them and making it about managing their emotions on this topic, what if we just didn't bring out toys and we just played group games instead? And so we started doing that. We never talked about it with the kids. We just, with that one class, the toys disappeared and it was all group games. The kids never noticed. They had lots of fun. All the problems just disappeared. And that's an example of how you can use structure or the environment or systems to just eradicate downstream conflicts, as opposed to constantly managing kids that are having a hard time dealing with the stimulus. And adults are the same way. There are many, I would say 80% of the conflicts in an organization, as a rule of thumb, 80% of them are caused by things that if you address them structurally, systemically, or you address them culturally, the downstream conflicts will just disappear or become far less intense.
What a powerful story that you were able to learn from the community, see what was going on, and then be able to adjust to create that environment where those kids could thrive.
Yeah, but it took us being willing to look at it and think about it. Our first reaction was to come in and correct the kids, and a lot of leaders want to come in and correct the employees or whatever. And then we finally realized, well, maybe it wasn't like we were doing a bad thing, but what we did, it wasn't setting the conditions for success. And so reflecting on what do we own, what could we own about that? Maybe we can change that. And it had a huge impact.
Yeah, I love that. Ethical leadership is a major focus of your work. And I think now more than ever, this is a really important topic. So in today's fast-paced world, how can leaders prioritize employee care and community service without sacrificing their business growth?
Oh, I don't think there's a sacrifice between them at all, if you understand what you're doing. I use the term magnetic organization frequently when I'm working with clients. And it's the idea of how do you build a company that attracts, builds, and retains the best people. Due to demographic changes in the country, the workforce is smaller than what it used to be. And so everybody is having a hard time hiring people. And the winners in the nonprofit space and the for-profit space are going to be people who can attract, build, and retain ideal employees. Being able to be good at that and effective through employee care as part of that should be a core strategy for any of the leaders listening to your podcast, because they're going to be able to perform work, because you can't if you don't have people, or if you're always dealing with people issues. And so I think that it's not, is there a dichotomy or do you have to choose one or the other? It's always, how do you care for your employees in a way that helps you also accomplish your mission? And I don't think most nonprofits will be to successfully accomplish their mission or expand their capacity to accomplish it if they don't know how to relate to their employees effectively.
Hey there, podcast family. If you're like me and deeply committed to improving your leadership skills and fostering better connections with your team, I've got something truly amazing to share with you. I'm proud to introduce the EMC Masterclass, something I talk about often as a certified trainer. It's an incredible program developed by the renowned Dr. Lola Gershfeld, an organizational psychologist and corporate emotional connection expert. You might remember her from a podcast episode where she shared invaluable insights into the world of emotional connection. Dr. Gershfeld's EMC Leaders courses are designed for anyone working with people, whether you're a manager, supervisor, team leader, educator, coach, mentor, or a team member. This program is truly for everyone looking to enhance their communication and collaboration skills to raise more revenue for their mission. Now, let me tell you why the EMC Masterclass is a game changer. Dr. Gershfeld's groundbreaking emotional connection process has been integrated into top universities' curriculum and recognized by international organizations like ICF, HRCI, and SHRM. Humans are wired to seek emotional safety, and when we feel safe, we're more likely to take risks, share innovative ideas, and collaborate effectively. The EMC process is the catalyst for creating that emotional safety within your team. The virtual EMC Masterclass consists of 8 modules with 4 hours of expertly recorded material, 13 quizzes to reinforce your learning, and a workbook filled with activities for offline practice and something I still refer to daily. Ready to become an emotional connection master? Dr. Gershfeld is offering an exclusive detail for our podcast listeners. Use the code LEADWITHHEART to enjoy a generous 10% discount on the EMC Masterclass. Head over to emcleaders.com and enroll in the EMC Masterclass today.
That is so good. You are speaking my language. And a lot of the conversations I have is if your mission is mental health and well-being, but you're not providing that employee care or supporting your staff who are hearing some tragic stories, like how are you actually living your mission in and out? You're just living it externally. But in order to be successful and drive your mission forward, you have to take care of your people. You have to invest in them because that's where, like you said, that peak performance comes, and the productivity, the collaboration, the innovation. People are more likely to take risks together. And so I think that's such an important piece. And it's not, I think the reason why I use sacrifice is maybe because nonprofits think that it's expensive to take care of their employees, but it's really not. And at the end of the day, if you're going to lose an employee and not retain them, it's going to cost twice their salary to find a new employee. Yeah. So invest in them in the first place, and you're actually going to be better stewards of your money, which is what you set out to do as part of your mission.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something really important there with what you said at the beginning, which is if you have a nonprofit focused on mental health, are you actually caring for your employees' mental health? And that's something I noticed that many nonprofits, especially charitable nonprofits, will have a cause like we're working with poverty, but our own employees can't afford to pay rent because we're not paying them, right? And so we're driving them into a place where they're on edge or they're living paycheck to paycheck. And so I think that it's very important that you learn how to, internally metabolize your own mission. Like, how do we apply this internally? And it's the same thing with leadership. Like, if you can't do it internally, really be honest, how effective are you likely to be doing it externally? You're probably doing something, but it's probably at a lower impact, because I think if you deeply understand mental health and care about it, if you deeply understand economic well-being, then you will apply it internally, and it's just naturally part of who you are. And so I think if you find that your employees are disconnected from the value of your mission in some way, then I think that dissonance will speak to them. It's going to provide wear and tear on your organization, but also it brings into question, like, how well do you really understand your mission? And I think exploring that and actually letting yourself have to struggle with that, like how do we stay true deeply to what we're doing, can be a powerful way to enhance your mission. And yeah, I agree that there's very few nonprofits that do work outside of the people that they have. And so if you can help your people be at their optimum, be at their best, and if you can retain them for longer periods of time, then I think that you're able to be more effective in your mission. And it's true. Many people they assume it has to be this heavy cost. But for example, there was a nonprofit that hired me. It was early childhood development program. And I was working with about maybe 20 or so center directors. So these are all very well-educated, competent women that were running these different centers. But they had about a 50% turnover rate. Every year, about 50% of them would leave. These are graduate, degreed individuals, hard to find. These are not well-paid positions, so it's not easy to replace people. Massively expensive to have this 50% turnover rate. And as I began to work with this team on just helping them understand and empower them to lead effectively and really make their jobs easier and enjoyable, so they were dealing less with staff issues and more on really being able to focus on the mission, we were able to bring that turnover rate down to zero. They had no turnover aside from somebody having a baby, somebody's spouse being in the military and moved across country or something like that. But we had no forced turnover that was happening due to people quitting or being removed. And it had everything to do with putting a relatively modest investment into a large group of leaders and making sure that they could be successful. And what was interesting, I was talking to the COO, and he was like, this has changed. It had changed him too. Even though he wasn't part of the program, they all reported directly to him. And he says, I don't have to deal with kind of fussy staff issues anymore. I'm dealing with more mission-focused problems or mission-focused challenges or more interesting challenges. And so the whole organization was able to be on point and more effective in its mission because they made this investment. You're right. There's a massive cost, which won't show up on a financial statement. And so most boards don't even notice it. That has to do with employees who are not operating at their best or are turning over.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you so much for sharing that story. And that's amazing that you went from 50% turnover to almost 0%. And I think that's just a important thing for nonprofit leaders to think about. Is there any other advice as we wrap up that you would give to anyone listening to this? And that might be an emerging leader or already a leader who has stepped into that position. Any advice that you would give them?
Yeah, I think whether you read my book or you read other books or you have coaches or whatever, I think understanding that leadership is a skill, and it's a skill that begins with you developing yourself and then learning how to relate to others. It's a phrase that I use in the book is that leadership it's intrinsically a relationship. Your ability to function in relationships is a direct reflection of your capacity to lead. And so becoming skilled at those things is important. And I think if you accept that wherever you're at right now as a leader, that you can improve if you want to, you can grow in your ability to have impact and be healthier personally as you go about doing that. And then just take one solid step forward. If I was advising somebody who wanted to get in better shape, the first thing would be find a friend who also walks every day and set up a meeting with them. But do one step, one simple thing that you'll do to begin moving forward. And as you add to those steps, you begin to grow and it becomes easier and you start to build momentum in it.
That's so good. And yes, I love that concept. Obviously, we're going to link to the book in the show notes and all where you're going to share, but where can people find you? Where can people connect with you to learn more about the work that you do?
Yeah, people can find me at my website, www.christianmuntean.com. I have tons of free resources. I have a blog where there's a lot of leadership content, a weekly email that has different content that people can sign up for, all related to leadership topics. The book's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and anywhere that you buy books. And so those are the best ways to reach me or get a hold of the book.
Well, thank you, Christian. Again, we will link to all of that in the show notes and in our social media. And just thank you so much for having this conversation with me, this really important conversation with me. I've just really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too, Haley. Thank you for having me.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.